Welcome to the League of American Orchestras webinar on the Gold Book, the ultimate project resource for volunteers by volunteers. I am Linda Weisbrook, a symphony volunteer for 3 decades supporting the Charlotte Symphony. My colleague, Camille Williams, became a volunteer for the Arkansas Symphony when she moved to Little Rock 15 years ago. Camille and I are members of the Volunteer Council of the League of American Orchestras, where we have an opportunity to work with volunteers from around the country. Not only are we volunteers like you, we've both used the Gold Book site many times to learn about other volunteer projects. We've been instrumental in sharing our group's projects with other volunteers through the Gold Book. We developed this webinar to better enable volunteers to share and learn. In this webinar, we're going to share a little history, some tips on how to prepare a noteworthy project submittal, and a step-by-step tutorial for the first-time submitters. Let's begin with a historical perspective. The Gold Book turns 40 this year. Created by the Volunteer Council in 1976, in conjunction with the League of American Orchestras, the Gold Book was published annually and cost $5 a copy. Named for being worth its weight in gold, the Gold Book was developed to highlight volunteer organizations' activities nationwide and provide innovative examples for other volunteers to adapt and follow, or, as we like to say, steal, copy, tweak. In 2005, the Gold Book transitioned to an online platform, goldbookonline.org. Today, access to this project database is always available, free of cost, and easy to navigate. This online resource contains successful projects from across the country in the following areas: audience development and community engagement, communication and technology, education, fundraising, leadership and organizational structure, membership, and service. The goal of the Gold Book is to create as complete a resource of volunteer projects as possible. No project is too small, too old, or too ordinary. Your project might just be the next great idea for another group. The Volunteer Council annually assesses all new submittals from the most recent submittal season and awards outstanding projects with an Award of Excellence or Roundtable Award. Awardees are asked to present their projects in several different formats to the entire volunteer delegation at the League of American Orchestras National Conference the following June. On occasion, the Volunteer Council will also recognize a classic award project, one that has made a continuous contribution to its orchestra and community for 10 continuous years or more. Submittals are welcome year-round. Most submittal activity occurs during the summer. In order for a project to be eligible for judging, it must be submitted prior to an early September deadline, which is announced to the field in June, immediately following the League's national conference. And the project must have been completed in the prior year, the July 1 to June 30 timeframe, which corresponds to most volunteer groups' fiscal year. Are you wondering what separates an award-winning submittal from the pack? Good preparation. We'd like to share some tips on how to help your submittal stand out. First and foremost, remember, this project has great value. Your organization invested untold time, talent, and treasure launching it. Treat it with the respect it deserves by taking the time to strategize on how to best communicate its innovation and success. Prior to beginning, familiarize yourself with the entire Gold Book submittal form. Note what information will be required to complete the submittal. Pay special attention to the narrative sections and any word limitations in each section. Think about your project in the broadest terms. Jot down a few words that describe the essence of your project. Things like brought in new members, great return on investment, introduced music to toddlers, restructured our organization, or shone a light on our orchestra. Think about the current situation in your community, in your orchestra. Did your project make a difference? Begin constructing a narrative. one that you might use to tell friends and neighbors about how exciting and successful this endeavor was. For example, think about how you exceeded your goals, how you engaged your membership, how you partnered with community stakeholders. The sky's the limit. These will form the basis of your submittal's project description. Collect the information needed to replicate this project: the calendar, the budget, the volunteers. Ask your treasurer or the project treasurer to create a statement of revenue by stream: tickets, sponsorships, underwriting, donations, etc., and expenses by category. Be sure to have the committee structure on hand with details on who did what to plan, how many staffed, and how, if any, your orchestra staff was involved. Bottom line, think about everything you would want to know if you were about to adapt a project to your own organization. Spend some time determining which category is the best fit for your project. On the website, goldbookonline.org, select the Submittal Guidelines heading. You will find an explanation of each of the categories. To reiterate, the categories include audience development and community engagement, communication and technology, education, fundraising, leadership and organizational structure, membership, and service. You can select only one main category for your project. However, a project can cross multiple subcategories. For instance, a volunteer-sponsored youth orchestra concert could be education with a community engagement component. But if it generated a lot of revenue, it could be fundraising. Take the time to analyze which will be the main category. Further on in the submittal, you will also have an opportunity to indicate that the project contains elements of other categories. For example, a fundraiser that also engages the community. When the Volunteer Council judges a project, we apply category-specific criteria. If the project is submitted in an inappropriate category, it can affect the final score. The Volunteer Council assesses projects for proper fit and will suggest a project be resubmitted if categorized incorrectly. The narratives tell your story. You have 4: the state of the community, the project description, category-specific questions, and volunteer structure. First, let's look at the mechanics. We suggest that you craft your responses in a Word document rather than typing directly into the response boxes. While direct input is certainly viable, the visible portion of the inputted text is small, and editing is a bit tedious. Once you're satisfied with your response, simply cut and paste into the appropriate response box. Your narrative should be grammatically correct, and because word count is limited, your responses must be concise. If you have exceeded the limit, begin editing to remove unnecessary words. Now, let's address content. In the Community Overview section, you have 100 words to briefly share the state of your orchestra, your community, your volunteer organization. Choose the one which supports the rationale for your project. For instance, our orchestra is in the black, but just barely. Ushering expenses were skyrocketing. We stepped in to provide ushers at no expense to our orchestra. This is the perfect place to start to establish your project's value. In the project description section, you have 400 words. If there is one particular section of the submittal that grabs the reader's attention, it is here. 7 questions are posed to help you formulate your response as follows. What were the goals or desired outcomes? How was the need for this project determined? How was success measured? What new information or ideas were gained? What obstacles or difficulties had to be overcome? Was this a new twist to an old idea or former project? If so, what was the difference? Do you think you will repeat this project? If not, why? The best project descriptions include these responses, but in such a way that the responses are seamlessly incorporated into the copy. We sometimes see a response that lists the question number with a simple answer. While it fulfills the request for information, it does not create a story that brings the reader in. Remember our suggestion that you consider how you would relate your project story to your friends? Tell it in a straightforward manner using simple language. Utilize an active voice rather than a passive one. For instance, change "a plan was devised" to "we devised a plan." Right away, it makes the narrative more personal and action-specific. Start your narrative by restating the needs and goal for the project. Next, include the most interesting aspects of the project. Tell the reader why your project is unique, different, special. Be sure to include how you might improve your project going forward. End on a high note with your successes. Tell the story of how the challenges were addressed and goals exceeded. Next, you will be asked to answer a few category-specific questions in 100 words or less. For instance, if you determine your main project category is education, the additional questions you would address are: who was the target group, and how did this project increase music education for that group? What specific elements or advantages make this educational experience valuable in your community? And did you work with any partners that enhanced this education project? Again, we suggest using a narrative rather than a question-response format. If you have space left over, think about how you might use it to reinforce a major point from your project description response. The final narrative concerns volunteer structure and utilization. There is no word limit in this section. However, continue to be concise and on topic. Respond with a clear, organized reiteration of the planning committee structure and the day of staffing of your project. We have two caveats. Do not use the actual names of the volunteers. Use the committee titles. Because this area does not have a word limit, some responders have used this space to continue making the case for their project. This is not the place for doing so. A few quick words about financials. Fill out the financials section completely. Even if you have no revenue or expenses, please indicate using zeros or N/A, not applicable. Make sure that your budget entries balance to your total expenses number. Incomplete or inaccurate financial information can impact your project score. Asking a few people who are unfamiliar with your project to review the submittal is a great idea. Because they don't know the project, they will ask the questions you may not have addressed, or point out something that is missing. Incorporate their feedback. It can make a big difference. Now that you have studied the submission guidelines and your stellar submittal work is well in hand, for those of you who are new to Goldbook or in need of a refresher, we've prepared a step-by-step instructional for submitting a project to the Goldbook. The Goldbook site was completely revamped last year. It's easy to use and has an exciting new feature that allows you to input, save, and finish at another time. More about that in just a minute. To access the Goldbook, go to www.goldbookonline.org. Let's create an account if you don't already have one. On the home page, you will see two blue buttons. Select Click here to submit a project. The first screen will ask you to either register or log in. To register, scroll down to create a username and password. Write it down and store it somewhere you can find it again. You will also need to provide basic contact information. Submit your registration by selecting the Register button. Now you can log in using your registered username and password. Aren't you glad you remembered your username and password? Return to the home page and select Click here to submit a project. Carefully read the directions. Pay attention to the stated time frame. Start by filling in the basics, project name and your group's name. Please note that in order to save and return to this submission, both these fields must have been completed. The next two fields are pull-down menus. the number of members in your group's organization, and the primary purpose of your project. During your preparation phase, you determined which category most closely describes your project. Select it here. Here is an example of a project that might defy classification. Let's just say we had a concert and a master class with Mozart. We sold tickets, $250 apiece, and had a pre-event cocktail party and auctioned off some famous wigs. We had an exclusive meet and greet for season subscribers with Herr Mozart following the event for an additional $1,000 per person. It was such a popular event, every volunteer wanted to be part of it. The project had a net revenue of $250,000 with expenses of $100. Is this an education project? It's a master class. Is it an audience development project? Famous person creates great awareness for orchestra. Is it a membership project? People from all over town joined so they could work on it. Most submitters would probably say the main purpose was to raise funds, so we would have selected fundraiser in the pull-down menu. We have an opportunity, however, to further define the components of our project by using the list of descriptions of what this project entailed. Our project was a fundraiser, a special concert. It was a master class. We also had an auction and involved many members and symphony supporters. So, we selected all that apply. In general, most descriptors will fall under the heading of your primary category. Next, you will enter your orchestra information. If you do not know the group size, please leave this field blank. We are interested in learning more about your community, your orchestra, and your volunteer organization. We discussed possible content earlier. You have 100 words. The next section is really the crux of the project description, which we also discussed earlier. Remember, you are not limited to answering the 7 questions posed. However, answering these questions in your narrative will help formulate your response. You have 400 words. When you reach the end of this section, step 1, you have the opportunity to save your work. Once you've hit save, the screen will shift to the top of the page, where you can select step 2 for the next page, or you can scroll down to the bottom and select next step to continue your submittal. Note the header in step 2 indicates that your project has been added, but remains in progress. Also note that you can move between steps by simply clicking on any one of the 3 in the striped area. The next series of questions will provide some project nuts and bolts. For instance, how many volunteers participated? For how long was the project on the drawing board? What was the actual project duration? While you have unlimited words in this section, please be concise. List committee members by position, not names. You have 3 questions to address. How many volunteers planned? How many volunteers staffed? And how, if any, symphony staff participated? The planning section is important for your project to qualify for an award. Remember, the event will need to have taken place in the prior July-June submittal season. However, the planning start date could have occurred outside that time frame. In this section, you will supply financial information. Enter your gross revenue. Then, enter your total expenses. The site will auto-calculate your net revenue. Even if your project has no expenses or revenue, please indicate in the first 2 fields by inserting a 0. It's important to list all in-kind goods and services received, including their value. Use the table which follows to share your project budget. Be sure to use your various categories for expense items. Please make sure that the total of the budget detail balances to the total expense amount to the left and in the section just above. If your event or project sold tickets, please provide that information in the dialog box. Please be sure to include every price level. If sponsorships rather than ticket sales were the main source of income, indicate this as well. Your detailed responses to the volunteers, the planning, and the financial sections are critical to the ability of other volunteer groups to replicate your project in their communities. And providing concise and accurate information will make the judges very happy. We're ready to save and proceed to step 3. Please note that you can also navigate backwards by selecting previous step. Step 3 is dedicated to collecting contact information for your orchestra, your president, and a contact person, usually the project chair. Here you see the fields requesting information about your orchestra and your orchestra's executive director. When the Volunteer Council selects a project for an award, the first communication will be sent to your orchestra. Please provide complete information about your current president. The Volunteer Council also contacts your organization to share the good news about your selection. The final piece of information needed is your organization's contact person. Generally, this person is the project chair. This will be the contact information listed on the Gold Book listing. Also, during the judging process, the Volunteer Council might have a question about the submittal and would like to contact a person knowledgeable about the project. You've reached the end. Take the time to thoroughly review your submittal before you click Submit. Save your work. Use the previous page button to return to steps 1 and 2. If you plan to revisit your submittal, do not select Submit at the bottom of step 3. Simply hit Save and Exit. Once you feel confident that your work is done, return to step 3 and hit the Submit Form button. It's simple. Return to goldbookonline.org. Sign in with your username and password. Good thing you saved your account login and password. Select View or Edit previously saved projects. A list of your entries will appear, and you can select the appropriate submittal. Note that completed submittals are marked as such. When you have finished reviewing your project and are ready to submit, simply go to Step 3, scroll down, and select Submit. Congratulations! You've successfully submitted and are hopefully on the way to accolades and national recognition of your project. Before we let you go, we wanted to remind you that there is a wealth of information waiting to be discovered in the Gold Book. Thanks to volunteers like you who generously share their wonderful projects with volunteers in communities across the country. If you're looking for a totally new project or a new twist on a long-term successful program, seek out what your peers are doing. When you access the Gold Book site, select Click Here to find a project. On the next screen, you will have an opportunity to define your search parameters. Projects meeting those keywords will be displayed for your perusal. Happy hunting! We're always here to help you. Any questions you might have, please forward to the League's Volunteer Council Liaison using the email listed here. Thank you for viewing this webinar on Gold Book. Camille and I, along with our Volunteer Council colleagues, are looking forward to seeing your wonderful project submitted to the Gold Book in the near future.